What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. If you're new here, I'll introduce myself. My name is Simon Hill. I'm a Black American from Louisiana, and I'm coming to you from Budapest, Hungary, where I am currently now in university studying sociology. I have a bachelor's degree already in music industry studies, but I'm very interested in learning about society, philosophy, and things related to history, and especially blackness, anti-blackness, white supremacy, and the story of our people and how this world came to be. And if you've been following my content, you know that I also do travel content sometimes. And recently, I released a few videos of me traveling in London. So to make a long story short and a short story long, basically, I traveled to the US last month, or in January, because I'm recording this on March 1st, and my flight got delayed. So I ended up having an extended layover in London. This was my first time in London. I had never traveled to the city before, and I was looking forward to just walking around, seeing Big Ben, going to the Parliament building, all that sort of stuff, riding the tube. And I stumbled into a bookstore with my wife, and I came across this book right here. David Olusoga's Black and British, A Forgotten History. And this is the updated version with the new chapter. And before I talk about this book, I want it to be known, this is not a paid endorsement. I don't know David Olusoga. Nobody sent me a check to talk about what I'm going to talk about in relation to this book. This is not anything that is sponsored by anybody. This is not sponsored content. I really wanted to talk about this because this book really, I don't even have the words to put it together. I just say this book impacted me in a way that Malcolm X's book impacted me when I was a kid. Like the writings of Huey P. Newton impacted me as a kid. Like reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, like Richard Wright's Native Son. This is how much that book impacted me when I talk about like great books that I've read in my life. So I have to be honest, I did not know much about the history of Black folks in Britain before I read this. And I'll be frank and honest, I didn't even know that there was slavery in the UK until I read this book. And what I find, most fascinating about this book is that David Olusoga, who is a storied historian, who is somebody with a lot of credentials to his name as a historian, he broadens the scope of what we think of as British Black history. Because if we only think about the Windrush generation, those Black folks who came from the Caribbean, primarily Jamaica, in the, late 50s, right? If we only think about them, if we only think about the African migrants who recently came, of course, we're going to have a very narrow perception of Black history. And Black folks will think in the UK that they just showed up, right? Like as if they weren't a part of the story for the last 600 years in the UK. And also, if we consider the British Empire, when we think about who actually colonized Africa, it was primarily divided between the French and the British, right? No other empire exported more people from Africa than the British. And that was a lot of what I learned from this book, right? And, there's so many stories in here that I found fascinating. It took me about a month and a half to read this very thick book. It's about 500 pages or so. But once you get past, I would say, chapter 2, it's hard to even put it down. There's so many things in here that I learned. Like I said, for example, I didn't know that in Britain that there was slavery. It used to be fashionable for the British aristocracy to keep short little Black children as quote, like quasi pets. Like that was crazy to me. It was very interesting to learn about the Black and white British abolitionists who wanted to fight to end the slave trade and also slavery in the UK. I also learned about the incident of the Zong, which was a slave ship that crowded too many people into the boat. And when the boat was essentially about to sink and they were about to run out of supplies, they tossed Black people overboard as a way to, save their cargo, to sell the slaves that they could save. And then when the slave traders made it to their port, they decided that they were going to file off the dead Black folks as insurance claims and try to make money on both ends of the exchange, right? So horrible stories like that, but also very inspirational stories like, George Washington's slaves. George Washington was the general who, helped fight the British to emancipate America. George Washington's slave, who I believe his name was Harry Washington or something like that, fought with the British and was running from George Washington and was a part of the tens of thousands of Black American refugees who left for Canada, and some left for the UK as well. Like, fascinating stories that you get in here in this book are just, I can't even put it in words. It's a fascinating history. It's a beautiful history. There are moments in this book that make you laugh out loud, that make you cry, that make you really reflect. And this is a book that I wish I had when I was 17, 18, 19, and I was reading a lot, getting knowledge of self and stuff like that. And I would highly encourage all the Black British folks, whether they're from Africa, the Caribbean, the Americas, whatever, to pick up this book and support David Olusoga's work. David Olusoga, from what I've heard in his interviews, often gets random death threats sent to his email. And as a Black man who's been online talking about my experiences with anti-Blackness abroad and just generally my Black life, I wake up every morning to my comment section with nothing but N-words and hateful rhetoric and death threats against my life from white supremacists in my YouTube comments and stuff like that. But people like David Olusoga give me inspiration. People like David Olusoga remind me not to be afraid. People like David Olusoga tell me to speak truth to power, and that writing our story is vitally important, and that we should never, ever cower in the face of people who say that we don't have a history, we don't have a story, we have nothing to tell and nothing to contribute, because this is only a portion of how big this book could have been when we talk about Black history in the UK. Another thing I have to say is that, this book mostly focuses on the British and how they sent a lot of ex-slaves and newly emancipated people to Sierra Leone. Most of the African story of this book is based in Sierra Leone, primarily Freetown and stuff like that. But once again, Black history is so large once you throw Africa and the Caribbean into it, right? So one of my criticisms of this book is that, the story of Sierra Leone is just one of many, right? What about Nigeria? What about Ghana? What about South Africa, Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, right? Other places that the British colonized as well, Mauritius. You get what I'm saying? I feel like, David Olusoga was trying to cram so much into this book, and by only focusing on the story of Sierra Leone, we're missing large portions of the Black British story by not talking about, what happened in Kenya, like the Mau Mau's and stuff like that, or the British, colonizing Tanzania, right? And another thing I have to say is that a lot of this story focuses also primarily on Jamaica when it comes to the Caribbean part of this story, but there's more that could be said, like about Belize, right, or British Honduras, about the Bahamas, Barbados. You get what I'm saying? Like, once again, I applaud this man for doing what he did by telling this story. I just feel like, there could be a part 2 of this book, a part 3. Like, this is a continuation. This is a great primer for anybody who wants to jump into Black British history, in my opinion. And it's an essential book for Black Americans as well, because I feel like we as Black Americans, we don't know much about what happens on the other side of the pond, as they like to say, right? But those are our brothers and sisters as well. And they went through a lot of anti-Blackness. They're still going through a lot of anti-Blackness, and a lot of them are hella conscious as well. And we should be encouraging brothers on both sides of the pond, Americans and Black British folks, to understand each other's history, right? Because there is a lot of xenophobia that's happening right now in the Black community. Like, there's Afro-fascistic tendencies that are bubbling under the surface of a lot of discourse. And I believe great books like this help break those barriers, because the Black British story is closely tied to the Black American story. From the Black Americans who were fighting for their freedom against the American slaveholders who said that they were fighting for equality for all men, right? To the Black American British soldiers that went to the UK to help them fight against the Nazis during World War II. To all the black abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, who toured all over the UK giving speeches saying that the British need to be on the side of abolition and fight against what the Americans are doing. Like, there's so much history that's interconnected because, you know, there's no other country probably in the world that has a closer culture to America than Britain, than maybe other Canada, right? So yeah, this is an important book, I think, for any black person in the Anglosphere. Any black person in the Anglosphere needs to read this book. Once again, this is not a paid endorsement, and there's so much here that I wanted to say more that I just don't want to, you know, run too much into your time if you're watching this video. But I want David Olusoga to know that I wanted to say thank you so much for writing this book. It greatly impacted me. Please don't be afraid of the white supremacists, the racists, the ignorant people who say that, you know, black British history is not this deep or it's not that profound. Don't listen to those people. To all the other black folks out there who are, you know, fond of learning, fond of reading, fond of gaining new information, fond of expanding their minds, pick up this book as well. And don't let people discourage you from reading and writing and telling your story as well. And for anybody who's watching this video, at the end, you know, I want to say thank you for staying this long. And once again, pick up this book. Pick up this book. And, you know, a lot of the times I encourage piracy because a lot of copyright law is really BS, right? But this is one book you should buy to support this black man that put his life on the line to write this book and to make sure that the next generation can read and know their history. Profound book, beautiful book. And that's all I got to say. Peace.